why not demand from a governance perspective a solution or a system that will keep you safe and to keep the company safe as well?
Welcome to ChatRog, the podcast on ethics in artificial intelligence. I'm Roger Steer, the corporate philosopher. Today, we're joined by Pav Gill, founder and CEO of Confide, a pioneering platform designed to help organizations surface risk, enable safe speaking up, and transform how internal investigations are done. From his experience exposing the Wirecard scandal to building governance tech, Pav brings a unique lens on how technology, ethics, and human agency intersect inside modern corporations. Pav, welcome to ChatRog.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you. You have an amazing story. Pav, you started your career as a lawyer, then became known for exposing the Wirecard fraud. Just tell us about that story first. You are the first person we have had on the show to identify the disappearance of $1.9 billion.
Yeah, I definitely didn't anticipate life to turn out that way. So I did start my career at, a few Magic Circle law firms, Allen Overy, Clifford Chance. Those were still pretty crazy times, though, because, there was the 1MDB scandal going on during that period. And both of those firms were working on that deal, in order to structure it as part of the deal team. That's how I ended up in that space. And that I was always very much into fintech. And one of the regrets I had was missing out on the so-called dot-com boom, having built PCs from young, from the 486 to the Pentiums and the whatever exists now, but then also having a legal mindset and being a lawyer. So having missed out on dot-com, I was like, fine, let's do fintech next and not miss out on that one. Having done corporate finance and fintech kind of like made sense. So that's how I eventually ended up at Wirecard as the head of legal for Asia Pacific. So Wirecard always, was boasting about being a fintech itself, even though there wasn't much fintechy about it per se. It was more of a financial institution doing payments, like a payments company from start to end. And so that's how I ended up in that company.
Fantastic. And what turned you from a lawyer, legal counsel into a whistleblower and then a tech entrepreneur? I mean, it's quite a journey.
It is. So I was investigating a whistleblowing case in Wirecard where someone came to me in confidence, ended up with an investigation, which the board found out about. They then coordinated a hellish experience for 4 months and didn't stop even after I left the company. I mean, that was just crazy stuff like, shouting, screaming, at me, having the local director here do that. And then when that didn't work, creating like a fake HR case against me. And that didn't work, trying to send me to Jakarta on a one-way business trip so I don't come back. And then when that didn't work, that's when the company was very happy because finally that's a business reason to force me to resign, which is I'm not going on a business trip. And that's when I left, right? So, it was like, okay, why can't you enjoy your fraudulent ways? I go find another job, but they didn't stop. So they were still sending people to follow me and my mom, setting up fake interviews and all that stuff with friendly companies. So that's how I was forced into becoming a whistleblower. So from someone who was actually investigating a whistleblowing case to becoming a whistleblower. And that was how the FT got involved. And subsequently, Süddeutsche Zeitung and the whole Twitter experience anonymously and the downfall of the company.
And just for our listeners, can you just briefly explain the nature of the fraud at Wirecard?
Well, I think that's still the billion-dollar question, I would say, because it still remains like, was there ever a legitimate business that was making those monies? Or was there accounting fraud where 1.9 billion is missing, right? So that's what's happening in the trial now in Munich, where the defense is
ongoing.
Saying, so the defense claims that there was a real kind of business and basically they were just scammed by the COO who ran away with those funds. Whereas the prosecution is saying, no, this was actually accounting fraud. They were inflated balances. The money just never existed. Now, the problem is it's a catch-22 because if you admit that the money existed, then the question is, where were the funds coming from and who were they going to? And it's my personal opinion that I think that was the case. And because you don't want to reveal either end of that funnel, that's why probably the less painful outcome is to just say, 1.9 is missing. It was probably taken away by Jan Marsalek, who's been exposed as a Russian spy for the last 20 years and all these things. But yeah, either way, it's a negative outcome.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the insight or moment that told you there's a gap here? We need a platform like Confide in order to help people surface concerns and stop bad things happening.
There's just a big audit trail problem in companies, I would say. You have a lot of scattered processes. You have different softwares doing very point solution type things. You have people as a problem as well, because communication lapses occur all the time between departments. So whatever is being surfaced in, say, HR may not be surfaced to legal or internal audit. So I saw all those gaps, and obviously the whistleblowing journey just took that to another extent. And that's when it hit me, why not put all my experience, having seen this compliance gaps firsthand and also lived through part of that journey from a people's standpoint, put it all into a software that would unify everything, all these high stakes compliance workflows into one platform, like a single source of truth. So that was how the Confide platform was born as an idea.
I think it's an excellent idea. So let's get into it a bit more. What does Confide do in very simple terms in terms of bringing together all of these disparate sources of information?
Well, it just unifies things from whistleblowing, grievances, third-party risk, AI governance, health and safety, even gifts and entertainment. So all these different processes, workflows that have a policy aspect to them, we are basically just digitizing those for a company the way they want it, the way their existing processes and policies and mechanisms are, into one place. So then that way you have a more three-dimensional view of where things are going wrong, what the interlinkages are between these different things. So for example, if you have someone blowing the whistle externally, saying one of your executives tried to threaten me and bribe me, straight away with that system in place, you'll be able to detect, wait a minute, this executive was 2 years ago in a grievance. He also raised a conflicts of interest approval request for this specific vendor. So that way you've got like the whole three-dimensional, a non-linear type case management aspect to your business.
So have you had any clients see benefit already? Has it flagged up something which they're, so pleased that the system brought it to their attention?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting is that clients are global and across all the different sectors and industries. And I think one particular case recently, we were installed specifically because of a series of allegations that were being made against two extremely powerful people in the company for a spate of sexual harassment type cases. So they were struggling to get evidence. So the board was kind of in that situation where okay, how do we get evidence against these guys objectively? And we need to crowdsource in a safe way potential victims for this. But the victims don't trust the existing hotline. And also they need some level of assurance that whatever we roll out would be something trustworthy and keeps them safe. So that's where, they got me to do like a little town hall as part of the rollout and say, this is who I am. This is why I built this platform. So you can rest assured it's not some insidious tool your company's putting in place. So I think that's how they rolled it out. And initially there was a lot of testing of the system. So you'll see a lot of like minor reports go through about like the coffee in the pantry being bad and stuff like that. But these were actually testing to see if they will rebound and expose. And I think after a very quick period of 2-3 weeks, that suddenly then ended up having all the serious cases come in. So I think, employees might have been testing, speaking to one another, and then they realized like, okay, this thing actually is okay. Let's try now, start reporting properly.
Thank you. And I think it's a wonderful example because 1.9 billion is a lot of money, but actually someone's physical safety is even more important. So thank you for sharing that. So there's a huge amount of data here, and that's obviously why AI is helpful because of its ability to process huge volumes of data at speed. So how much of Confide's functionality functionality, is already powered by AI or is moving in that way. For example, signal detection, pattern recognition in emails, early warning dashboards. Obviously, without giving away trade secrets, give us a flavor of how the AI and what sources it's using to pick up these patterns.
Well, it's interesting because we are already using AI for automated routing, risk scoring, pattern recognition as well, so that teams can prioritize these issues. And when we think about, okay, how did Confide platform, which as a flagship software started in whistleblowing, how did that now add AI governance in there? I think it's not too dissimilar in a way because, for whistleblowing and case management, what we created was a unified system for the intake, triage, secure comms, evidence handling, and oversight. And then we also built in like form logic, routing, permissions to adapt to different policies and countries. Whereas where the AI and workflow automation fit in is on the same foundation. So AI governance actually is kind of the same foundation. It lets organizations track AI-related risks, approvals, supplier checks, model inventories, incidents, testing notes, sign-offs. I mean, the aim is really to make sure that decisions, approvals, and controls are captured in a clear and auditable way. So that would be the fundamental thesis that underlies not just the AI governance module, but all the different products that we have.
Yeah. So when you automate all of this data, you record it, you automate investigations, what are the main ethical risks that you have to be aware of and your clients have to be aware of? For example, false positives, bias, privacy, etc.
I would say the whole function of the AI is not to draw conclusions about our individuals, for example. I think that's a big risk. So the primary use of the AI would be to support the workflows. So for example, if you think about say the whistleblowing aspect or any of the product aspects, the very first stage is the most important because that's where you are in contact with the person raising that concern or that issue. So you want AI to have that intelligence to extract as much info at that moment as possible. So whether that's conditional logic driven or is chatbot driven, being able to make use of that first stage opportunity, that's key. And then where AI would continue to play a part is also at the end. So for example, in the middle will be the next step saying, look, this report has come in and it potentially impacts these different regulations you're looking at now, right? So there's a bit of a legal tech element, I would say, in that, or reg tech element. And then from a conclusion standpoint, you want AI to be able to automate the reporting aspect. So whether that report, the final report, that goes back to the person or to your board or to a regulator, auditor, lawyer, whoever, you can use AI to create that. So it's very important to also stress that the platform avoids making automated judgments about people. So it's also important to communicate that, frankly, to people using them, to the end users, that the system is actually not like spying on them or profiling them. Yeah, just basically supporting the workflows.
Good. As you know, in every corporate scandal, someone somewhere or more than one person in multiple places knew what was going on and did nothing about it. That is until it's too late. I was just wondering, as you were describing the process, so AI helps to flag and raise issues, but it goes to human oversight, which is great. But does the system then detect whether or not that human does something about it? So there's a link here between Confide and proper oversight, governance, and investigation, internal audit activities, isn't there?
Yeah, from an audit trail perspective, yes, I would say. So every single action is being audit logged, for example, from the case management standpoint. Now, as you rightly also kind of insinuated, the biggest failures don't come from technology, but they actually come from people, right? So for example, at Wirecard, the tools failed, whatever they could have had, it's because the people with influence did not want that scrutiny. So ironically, AI can magnify that kind of behavior if it's not kept in check. If leaders want to hide something, they can mislabel data, they can override controls, or they can even approve models without proper checks, right? So good governance to me, honestly, is not about having clever models or all these things in place. It's about actually making sure no one can quietly bend the system. So I think, again, like even if they're trying to do that, because of the audit trail element, from an accountability or transparency perspective, should something go wrong, at least again, you can go in to check, okay, how was this process or this issue managed? Was someone trying to do something dodgy? Was someone trying to close a case without the relevant approvals or the relevant process being followed? So like, if you're a board member, you want to come in, you want to check to ensure like, okay, something blew up. How was this particular issue handled? I think that's where you have that benefit.
So, as you've already said, speaking up culture, creating a speaking up culture is deeply human at a fundamental level. And this is where your work and my work connect, I think, because one of the things that I've been doing is detecting the amount of fear in the workplace. And the reason there's so much fear in the workplace is it's not a democracy, it's an autocracy. In other words, power is held at the top and everybody else responds from what people call consequence management. I'm sure you're very familiar with that because you've experienced those consequences. So how do you design a system that supports this human dimension without actually stoking fears, but actually making people feel safer, because the system is there to help them?
I mean, in order to build trust, I would say that the staff need to actually realize that something is working and believe in it. That's like the first step. And that's a really execution focused approach, not a slogan approach, which a lot of companies like to do, right? So I would say like trust comes really from having structure, from having discipline. So people will actually trust the system when they see like the reports that they're making are handled properly, responses are cleanly recorded, and decisions are actually explained. And this part is always a lack. Decisions, for some reason, whether it's because management or the more senior you get, you feel the less need to have to go down to that level to explain your decision-making ways. So a lot of ego potentially in that as a problem. So I think, if you have a way which demonstrates that not only from a solution perspective, but from an outcome perspective, you are tying in everything into a cultural aspect, into a communication aspect, a human aspect, I would say. I think that's where, basically like the most simple example, we don't have any sacred cows. Something came in, okay, it could have been against like the biggest biller in the company. But if there needs to be a consequence, then the consequence should be there and it should be visible. Shouldn't be like hidden away or, just along those lines. That's where people will be like, okay, wow, these guys actually mean business. No one's got a God mode on if they've done something wrong.
Here's an idea and a question. So one of the things about culture is, certainly in a fear-based culture, like we get in many workplaces, it amplifies bad news or it suppresses bad news or it just suppresses news. One of the ways to start shifting that works is using human, digital or hybrid systems to actually amplify good news. So could you actually increase the trust and credibility in Confide by not only checking for bad behaviors, but actually amplifying and celebrating great behaviors in the organization? Is that something that could build credibility and actually build a positive culture, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's various ways. I've heard companies trying to do something akin to like, a buck bounty system in the cybersecurity space. So actually rewarding. So throwing in this whole reward element, like, okay, we would like to publicly thank so and so if they're not anonymous for having raised this issue. This issue was investigated. We saved a potential damage amount of X amount, for example, and we would like to publicly acknowledge this. So that could be one. Some companies kind of are thinking along the lines of financially rewarding as well. So if you want to financially reward, then the question is, okay, but what if the person wants to be anonymous, right? So the way they're going about thinking is putting in a way where someone, that same reporting person could put in like say their crypto address, which is anonymous, and then like a little token of thanks, like a mini bonus, like it could be a couple of $100 or whatever, goes in as a token of appreciation to this person's anonymous crypto account, right? So I guess that's a very forward-thinking, novel way. My only concerns with that approach, with anything financially incentive, is that it also could have a negative aspect to it, because then you don't want people to be going around ratting each other out for just to get a financial incentive, because then it's a horrible atmosphere to work in as well. So I think, yeah, so that's how I've been seeing it kind of play out from a software kind of reward culture perspective.
Yeah. I mean, as you probably know, the research is pretty clear that recognition is far more powerful than rewards. Certainly small rewards like $100 or $200 here and there, for people to start to see that actually having the courage to speak out, or actually doing the right thing all the time. That's what I'm getting at. So we're talking about identifying and rectifying things when they go wrong, when people do bad things. But I'm just wondering, and you've answered it, but I'm just wondering going forward how you can create a part of the system that celebrates people who do the right thing, which doesn't involve whistleblowing. It's actually just doing the right thing. It's helping each other out, winning a great contract, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's this whole whistleblowing thing has such a overarching blanket kind of net that it casts, that it kind of labels, or has a real risk of labeling, even raising a legitimate concern as whistleblowing, right? It could be a purely
Absolutely.
operational business thing. It doesn't need to be personal. For example, an employee could be very concerned that, besides the fact that her boss is using his wife's company as a vendor, that which is already unethical to an extent, a large extent. But the concern could not be that. It could be that the vendor itself kind of sucks, right? Whatever is not qualified is delivering bad outcomes. Customers are going to suffer. Now, if that person were to raise it to the boss directly, obviously it's not going to turn out well. But if internal audit has a channel that they can understand that, hey, look, someone anonymously is flagging a very objective risk. They're not personal. They're not attacking the boss. They're actually saying, look, this specific vendor has low QC, is going to impact us as a business. Internal audit wants to know about it. So you need to create safe mechanisms for people to do that. And if you don't want to go into, say, whistleblowing or even grievances or any of these things, you could even confide. We've had a customer ask us to create a product called Disclosures. So Disclosures is a very interesting product and it's bespoke for that company. They actually wanted it. So they wanted a product where employees could just raise something without necessarily wanting to drive that issue to an outcome. So, for example, they could say, look, I walked past this office, the aircon was leaking. Someone should just take note. And that's it. They go on their own way. They don't actually drive for an outcome. For example, say a bullying or a victim wants to see an outcome. So I think that would be also a very good way. So you're digitizing a feedback box or some kind of town hall experience where people don't want to voice the CEO directly, but having that channel, and then potentially saying publicly to all employees, look, you guys raised these concerns, we've dealt with it, and thanks everyone for doing that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a culture expert, I would say, but that's kind of the ways I would go about thinking about these things.
Thank you. Let's now move to the boardroom and governance. So in financial services, for those who are not aware, there's something called 3 lines of defense in terms of stopping bad things happening and managing risk. The first line are the customer-facing groups. The second line is compliance. The third line is audit, and audit reports to the board. How do you think your work and Confide is helping with the deployment of governance tech, given that many boards are still struggling with culture, with understanding the human dynamics in their organizations? I mean, we're already seeing it at the moment with the BBC and this issue around the way that the Trump speeches were edited in a way which were perhaps not helpful. How is this going to help boards, do you think?
Well, boards are always assigned with oversight primarily, right? So they want to make sure that things are operating within specific frameworks, within whatever governance elements, whether it's cybersecurity or it's AI governance, financial. I think they primarily want to be able to, I would say, from a practical perspective, hold people accountable. So if you think about every time something blows up, then the board gets involved and they would be like, okay, where did things go wrong? who dropped the ball potentially, or where in this process did things actually take a turn for the worse. And they may not be doing that in order to just blame somebody or point the finger, but to genuinely understand from a process perspective, okay, now that we've found the gap or the issue from a process-oriented structure, we can now fix this to prevent it happening again. So I think if you have like a solution like Confide, which logs a lot of these things, including, all the way, the whole life cycle, right? From the issue being raised, who was involved, what was the decision-making outcomes that were taken and why. So I think that will give like a really single source of truth. I would say like a one place to go check how something started, who dealt with it, what happened at the end. You're not going to run into finding out from people necessarily, or even which in itself in a large organization is a huge headache, right? Like, how do you find out from who? Like, the first question is like, okay, who was involved? Who do we ask? And then people will be delegating, sub-delegating. It becomes this whole thing. People will be saying he said, she said issues. So I think, being able to capture the whole front to end in one place would really help boards go and reference something, even in the startup space. If a startup suddenly explodes, you want to, as an investor, come in, or as a board member, to see, okay, did anyone raise any issues? If they did, how were they dealt with? Instead of going into this whole, like, everyone saying they don't know, or they said this and said that. So I think that's how the solution will be very powerful from a accountability and oversight, and also a gap analysis or risk analysis perspective. If reports are coming in have been coming in over a time frame specifically of this department or this individual, you can already zero in and see these are the heat maps. So I guess that's how they'll also help.
So financial services, which is where you were working in terms of Wirecard, they have regulators. What's the interest of regulators in Confide in terms of specific financial regulation? And is there any interest from a broader national oversight in terms, for example, the EU AI Act, et cetera, et cetera? So where's the connection between governance and regulation and legal oversight of AI systems?
Yeah, so regulators will just pass the law, and then they will expect companies to comply, right? So companies, in terms of their compliance, it will go to like, okay, the board members, we need to make sure we're complying with, say, the EU AI Act. Board members will say, what are the policies we have in place? How are we executing them? And then it goes down that level to the execution side. So most companies would then draft up a policy, and they'll have that workflows and everything. So that's where Confide plays a part. So we will digitize that into the software, and we'll enable them to basically use tech to comply with regulations. Now, where the AI aspect will also come in very handy is we are going to build it in such a way where companies would be able to then create their own workflows through a Gen AI type process. So they'll be able to create their own prompts. They'll be able to say, for example, look, our transaction monitoring tool has detected this as a transaction has been flagged, right? A level 2 transaction has been flagged. Now, someone investigates it in the Confide platform. If it requires a triggering of, say, a suspicious transaction report, a company can then automate that workflow to that regulator as well, to then automate this. So every time there is a financial transaction, it needs a STR filing. You have now created an automated workflow to the relevant regulator. And from the regulator's perspective, why this would be very useful as well is because if you're talking about regulated entities, you want to go into companies and check if their controls, their trust and controls, their compliance controls are all functioning. Now, today that's being done in a very manual way. They are proving it through Jira, through Excel spreadsheets, through emails, screenshots, and all that stuff. So if you are able to have a system like Confide that brings all these things in one place, as a regulator, you can ask for access to come in, a limited access even, to come in and see how the compliance controls are functioning. What are they? What are the policies? How many cases? Which weren't resolved? Why were they not resolved? So you're able to hold these entities accountable in a very resource light manner. So that's I would say one use case that comes to mind.
And are regulators interested in your work?
Yeah, I would actually say, but not for this reason. Maybe because I haven't spoken about it to them. They're more interested in digitizing their own current systems. So if you think about even a whistleblowing channel, whether it's, whatever, it could be a central bank's one, or a lot of countries are still extremely backward in that. If you think about certain countries, if you go on their tip-off whistleblowing page, it's still, you've got to download a PDF, fill it up, and then email it. And then some poor guy is coming in the regulator's side, having his inbox cluttering and having to manually open each email, be like, okay, who's this person? What is this? It's a fake email. How do I even respond? So just a simple triaging of that, changing that hyperlink to a Confide system where whoever is reporting, you can live chat with them. You can send them a message. Thank you for thank you for your report. Can you send me more info? Build that trust, have the online meetings with them at some point, and then just triage that whole process and to next level. I think that's where they're coming at it from. I will also say that they're also coming at it from an investigation standpoint. So we have the ability to spin up same day portals. So, for example, if there's, say vaping, like in Singapore, there's a vaping epidemic going on. Government's really upset. If they say, look, we want to design a specific website where any vaping related tip-offs or some information can be sent to, can you do that? So yes, we can. On the same day, we can spin it up. They can drive traffic to it, whether with the media or whoever. And in a funny way, based on what we were discussing earlier in terms of incentives, they could then incentivize and reward these people that are reporting it. And again, vaping is it was relatively minor issue, but you can see how this scales out to large scale investigations. For example, bribery or corruption. You want to crowdsource from members of the public. You don't know how to. They don't want to expose themselves. Having this as an intermediate layer with a look and feel of that specific investigation, I think would be very powerful as a use case.
Thank you. Before we start looking towards the future and your hopes and dreams for this work, for our listeners, perhaps you can just summarize what are the red flags organizations ignore which eventually lead to scandals, and what role, in summary, should tech play in surfacing those red flags?
I mean, it's a very emotional process a lot of times. I think emotions drive a lot of wrong decisions, even in relationships. So, much less in corporations. Whistleblowing is a good example. In my opinion, it's a very emotionally charged process from both sides, because you have someone thinking that they're doing their job, raising a concern. And the knee-jerk reaction tends to be from a lot of companies, not finding out what this thing is, but actually who is the person and why are they reporting this, right? So you go straight, you knee-jerk straight into motive and identity, versus if you could just strip that out with, say, Confide or technology or whatever, and just focus on the facts of the report and ask yourself as a company that only one question, okay, which is, if this is serious and legitimate, would it have a material adverse impact on my business if I don't deal with it? Right? Because I think if you take that mindset and then you start going objectively to get more information, then you're doing a less emotionally driven process, and you will save yourself that outcome. So I think tech would play that interface in terms of hopefully stripping out emotions, focusing on facts, and having an objective, fact-driven exercise to a lot of these issues. Yeah, I mean, if whistleblowers on the flip side are not angels as well, a lot of times, they could become blackmail situations where they now try to drive an outcome, or they're threatening the company, or they're saying, look, if you don't want to deal with it or pay me out, SEC will. So it's up to you to decide. So how do you navigate that side of this funnel as well?
Thank you. So let's start thinking about your wishes and dreams. If you could embed one principle into every governance or whistleblowing platform, digital or human, what would it be and why?
It would be what we did, which is the audit trail. I think that's super critical, because a lot of times it's also the people that are messing the investigations up for whatever incentives or agenda they might have. For example, if you have like a general counsel who's so influenced by Hollywood, thinking that their job is to be the fixer and make problems go away, that's showing value to the CEO and scoring points, like in Billions, the series. If they have that mindset, or they're like a sycophant or something, the audit trail acts as a check and balance, because then they know how they are dealing with this situation is going to now reflect on them. So as much as they want to protect the bosses, they need to know that if anything explodes, their actions are being logged, right? So I think that forces a kind of sensibility into it, which you wouldn't, if you don't have this, then it goes again into he said, she said, people saying, no, I had this face to face. This is not what happened. That person was lying. That department didn't handle it, or that person left. So we don't know where they are. They don't want to speak to us. So I think that audit trail is really critical, not just for board members, but also investors, also for regulators, also for insolvency situations. Insolvency administrators may want to come in and see, okay, is the company actually telling me the truth as to how this thing exploded? So there's a lot of power in that audit trail. On the flip side, it's also potentially what would scare people away, because we all know there's companies that insist strategically, one, not to have audit trails in certain situations.
Which is in itself a red flag. I've seen that. So my next question, you've just triggered it, which is, are you optimistic that technology will empower more transparency and accountability, or are you worried it might create new forms of silence or self-censorship?
No, I'm optimistic on it. I think technology is giving people more avenues, quicker avenues to raise issues and demand outcomes. AI is totally outcome driven, and the outcomes are super quick. So I think that's also going to put a spin on how people have been doing, a complete revamp on how people have been dealing with not just processes and organizational stuff, but also people. So, everything's so quick. Everyone wants quick outcomes, quick answers, quick determinations on X, Y, and Z. And I think that's also going to give people more of a voice, because if you're now communicating with a chat GPT, you would think communicating your woes or your issues or your questions is going to be a way of life. Now, if your company's not going to give you that ability to do so, then that's just going to force you into using external or non-company ways to do that. Business leaders need to get ahead of that curve, understand that Gen Zs are no longer, and even younger generations are no longer the old school ones. You can tell to keep quiet, put your head down, do your work and go home, take your salary, stop asking questions. It's not. If you even say that, they will record you, put you on TikTok, and now you're the one looking like a complete idiot for saying that. So I'm very optimistic on that front. What I'm hoping, and this is like pure optimism, is that regulators and law enforcement agencies also start to adopt that as quickly as criminals or wrongdoers would, because otherwise it's just going to be that endless chase that happens.
Indeed. Before we get towards the close, one of the things we like to do is a quick fire round where hopefully you can say yes or no or whatever it is. So you've got a choice. The first one is hotline or digital platforms. Which wins and why, in your view?
Digital platforms. I absolutely hate hotlines for whistleblowing, because most of the senior people are not going to pick up a hotline and call some random person they don't know, that's not even part of the company, and tell them what their issues are.
Exactly. AI triaging reports, yes or no?
Yes.
Most underestimated risk in corporate culture today?
Benefits.
Can you explain a bit more why you say that?
I think companies are hesitant to reward people. And in a society or in a world where everything's driven by money or by incentives, whether it's gamification type incentives or financial ones, you need to, and also the endorphins and this, that slow, that expectation of quick outcomes. I think if you are not going to play with what's happening in the world today, then you're going to have disgruntled or like low morale, or just like, okay, just a boring, normal company doesn't understand what makes me tick, what motivates me or incentivizes me. Then I think that's where things will also work against your favor.
One piece of advice you give to a CEO of a large firm about integrity and culture in 2026, apart from benefits?
Take it seriously. Be proactive. Don't delegate it to control functions. While as a CEO myself, I like to be optimistic. I think we also need to put things the way lawyers think as to what happens if it doesn't happen. So that would make you, and in a world, I think and I feel very strongly about this, in a world where agreeing to disagree is becoming extinct as an art form, I think the more we adopt that kind of thing, we try to see the other side of why what I think wouldn't work from another person's point of view. I think that would really help mitigate a lot of bad outcomes.
And my final question to you is, what is the one thing you'd like our listeners to think about or do in terms of the work that you've been doing so admirably?
I mean, when we had this whole ESG phase, a lot of effort, grassroots effort, bottom-up driven effort was from people demanding greener companies, demanding oat milk in the pantries. That pretty much happened overnight. So I think why not demand from a governance perspective, a solution or a system that will keep you safe and keep the company safe as well, and also operating in a very integrity-first manner. So before you do an interview, make sure that a company has Confide platform in place. And if it doesn't, ask them why not.
Wonderful. I love it. So I'm going to summarize the key takeaways for me in our conversation. AI can turn whistleblowing into an audit trail that both removes risk and benefits your business. AI is outcome driven and the outcomes are super quick. This can head off problems before they become existential. For companies that don't have a product like yours, it's still possible for more than $1 billion to go missing from a company. And the most underestimated business risk going forward in most corporations today is the benefits package. So, Pav, thank you so much for this deeply illuminating conversation. You've been a fantastic guest. And, I, for one, am very excited by the work you're doing because it's desperately needed. As an expert myself in corporate culture, we need to fix this ASAP. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you as well. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. So that was Pav Gill, founder and CEO of Confide. If you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Roger Steer. Join us next time on Chat Rog, where we examine not just what AI can do, but what it should do.